everyone, my name is MONALISA Sarkar and I am a student of B.Ed second semester of Siliguri Tarai B.Ed College. Today the lesson that I am going to discuss with you is on a prose story, that is The Last Lesson by Alphonse Daudet. So, before beginning with this prose, I would like to discuss about the objectives of this prose. So, the first objective is that we get to know about the theme of this prose, that is theme of language acquisition. The second objective is to realize the importance of our native language and to respect our own language. So, and third, also about the poet who is Alphonse Daudet. So, before beginning with the story, I would like to discuss about the poet who is Alphonse Daudet. So, students, do you know who is Alphonse Daudet? Alphonse Daudet was a French novelist and a short story writer, and he was born on 13th May 1840 in Nimes, France. His first work is Les Amours in 1858, and his other works include the works such as The Nabobs, Kings in Exile, Jack, The Last Lesson, and so on. He is a great poet during his century and he mostly writes English poems. He began his career as most aspiring writers during 19th century, and his works combine elements of romanticism, realism, and naturalism. He was a well-known novelist during his age and he died at 16 December 1897. So students, now before beginning with the poem, I would like to give a glimpse of the story. So, do you have any previous knowledge of this poem? There are many poems and works related to this. There are some related works such as For the Fallen by Lawrence Binyon, Thought About the School Life by Gerald Terrace, etc. Other works which portrays similar working styles and theme of his works. The Alphonse Daudet was a well-known poet during the 19th century and it denotes by his works writing patterns, themes, naturalism, romanticism, etc. So students, now let's begin with the prose story, which is Last Lesson by Alphonse Daudet. The Last Lesson by Alphonse Daudet. So, at the beginning of the poem, Franz, who is the protagonist, started for school late that morning. He was afraid of being scolded as Mr. Hamel would ask questions on participles and he did not know anything about it. The weather was warm, bright day, the birds chirping, the Prussian soldiers drilling, and so on were the activities that he saw on his way to the school. But he resisted the temptation and hurried off to school. On the way, he saw a crowd in front of bulletin board near the town hall. Usually, there was huge bustle when school began, but the day was calm as Sunday morning, which seems very unusual for him. Through the windows, he saw his classmates were already in their places and Mr. Hamel walking down with terrible iron ruler in his arm. Then Franz opened the door and went in, and Mr. Hamel kindly asked him to go to his place. Franz then noticed that their teacher had put on his beautiful green coat, his field shirt and little black silk cap, all embroidered, and also saw the village people were sitting quietly on usually bank benches which were usually empty. So he was very surprised that why the villagers were sitting at the back and why his teacher was wearing this dress. Everybody looked sad, and Hauser has bought an old primer. This seemed very unusual to Franz, and he did not understand that why the villagers were there and why Mr. Hamel had put on his embroidered clothes. So then Mr. Hamel said that it is the last lesson he would give them. Henceforth, only German was to be taught in Alsace and Lorraine. This is their last lesson in France, and he wanted them to be very attentive. Franz felt very sorry that he had not learned his lessons properly. Then the image of Mr. Hamel had changed in his mind in a new way. Then Franz was very sad that he could not complete his lessons on participles, and he has to take another lesson for his study. Then Franz understood why Mr. Hamel had put on his Sunday clothes and why villagers were sitting at the back bench. They had come to thank Mr. Hamel for his master of 40 years' faithful service to their school and to show respect for their country, which was there no more. Mr. Hamel was asked to recite, but Franz could not respond, but he did not scold him and fault himself for it. Then he talked of the French language, which is the most beautiful language in the world, which is the clearest and the most logical. Their language was the key to the prison. Then they had lesson in grammar and writings. The pigeon cooed very low in their roof. Franz thought if they would even make the pigeon sing in their German. All the while, Mr. Hamel was sitting motionless, and his sister was packing clothes upstairs that they could be clearly heard. After the lesson and after writing, they had lesson in history. All at once, the church clock struck 12, and then midday prayers woke up. At the same time, the trumpets of the Prussian returning from Dill sounded under the window. Mr. Hamel stood up and he wanted to say something, but something choked him. Then he took a piece of chalk and wrote on the blackboard as large as he could, which is Viva la France. Viva la France. So, Viva la France means long life France, which means to France to live forever. Without a word, he made a gesture with his hand to indicate that the school is dismissed and they might go home. So, this is the end of the prose, the last lesson by Alphonse Daudet. So, students, to conclude the prose story, the last lesson by Alphonse Daudet is a prose which is related to Franco-Prussian War in 1870-71, where France was defeated and Germany was conquered. So, in all school, it was declared that German language was to be implemented, and that day was their last lesson of the protagonist Franz and his classmates on French. The prose last lesson deals with language imposition and loyalty towards the language. So, at the end of the story, Mr. Hamel wrote on board Viva la France, which means long live France. It is a symbol used by Mr. Hamel to show his loyalty and love for his language. So, at the end of the story, the protagonist Franz feels very depressed and sad because he could not study well and could not complete his work on participles, and also the image of Mr. Hamill, that is his class teacher, also changed in his mind, because first he would think that he was a very cruel and arrogant teacher, but at the end it turned out to be his role model. So the last lesson of Alphonse Daudet deals with loyalty, love and respect for the language French. So students, at the end of the story, I would like you to show the objective, which is the loyalty and love of the language French. So now I will give you some homework related to this prose, the last lesson by Alphonse Daudet. The first homework is on, you have to describe that why this title is called the last lesson, and second you have to describe that what are the unusual things that Franz saw on his way to the school on reaching towards his school. Thank you.